Quentin Palfrey most recently served as acting general counsel at the U.S. Department of Commerce under Joe Biden. Before that, he was the 2018 Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor and a former state prosecutor. Quentin Palfrey joins me now. Quentin, good to see you.
Nice to see you, Jim. Thanks so much for having me.
Why are you the best person for the job?
So as a former assistant attorney general, I've seen firsthand how much impact the AG's office can have on the issues that matter the most. The AG can bring consumer protection cases against predatory lenders and scammers, can bring much needed urgency to the fight against racial injustice and the climate crisis, and the fight for our democracy.
And why are you the best person to lead those fights?
So I think that my experience as a former assistant attorney general and as a leader in the Biden and in the Obama administrations has given me the experience that I need to lead this office in this really important time.
Do you think as attorney general, there's anything you'd do differently than Maura Healey has done it in her 8 years in office?
So I think Maura Healey's been a terrific attorney general. I had the chance to work alongside her when I was the chief of the healthcare division. She was the chief of the civil rights division, and we worked hand in hand. I think one of the things that she's done really well has been to fight back against a corrupt and immoral Trump administration during a time when that was desperately needed. At the same time, I think that sanity in the White House has allowed us to shift our focus to issues that affect us here in Massachusetts every day. So I would envision that the next few years in the Attorney General's office, we can focus a little bit more on the issues that affect us here in Massachusetts.
Speaking of corruption in the Trump administration, one of the few criticisms that I've heard of her is that she was not tough enough on public corruption here in Massachusetts. She thinks those criticisms are unfair. Do you think they're unfair?
So I think that this is a moment in time when public faith in government is at a low ebb, and I do think that the Attorney General should help to provide accountability so that people can trust that the people working for them are doing so in their best interest. So I'd like to see a heightened focus on public corruption in our office. I had some firsthand experience when I came into the Biden administration on day one. I inherited a lot of legal issues, a lot of messes that were left behind by some frankly corrupt political appointees in the Trump administration. So I have some recent experience trying to clean up some of those messes.
You mentioned consumer protection. This is a variation on a theme. I'd say 700,000 people in the Commonwealth were on unemployment during the pandemic, actually many more, but 700,000 who the Baker administration is contending through no fault of their own, meaning the recipient, received unemployment benefits. No fraud, nothing like that. The Baker administration now believes the money has to be repaid, not in every case, but in most of those cases, sometimes tens and tens of thousands of people. One, should those people have to repay that money to the state? And if they should not, what are you going to do to help them?
So I don't think so. I think that when folks received money that was not through the fault of their own, I think that we should figure out some kind of a legislative fix to make sure that people who relied on that money at a really delicate time in this economy don't have now a huge financial burden on them to repay that money. But I think that one of the things that the AG office can do on this issue and many others is really be the consumer's advocate, really stand up and fight for workers and consumers and civil rights. And I think that extends beyond the law enforcement function of enforcing consumer protection laws to really being an advocate on Beacon Hill and being an advocate in the public conversation. And I think that if there's an unfair approach that the governor takes or the legislature takes, the attorney general should say so.
All three of you, Liz Reardon and Campbell, talk about combating systemic racism, either on your website, your early campaign jaunts, that sort of thing. How specifically do you as Attorney General do that?
So I think that the murder of George Floyd and the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict are just the most recent reminders that there are two justice systems in America. We imprison too many people for too long for doing too little. Race has too much to do with who ends up in the criminal justice system. And I think the AG is one of the key figures who can fight back against that racial injustice. It's not one thing. We obviously need to bring urgency to police reform, to criminal justice reform, but we also have to look at systemic disparities in the healthcare system, in the education system, in the housing system, and in transportation. Unfortunately, we have a legacy in this country of systemic barriers to voting. And so I do think that the AG, as one of the main civil rights voices in the Commonwealth, needs to bring urgency to this fight.
You mentioned criminal justice reform. The first two examples you picked when I talked about racism was police misconduct. You probably know in the criminal justice reform passed by the legislature a little more than a year ago, there was a minor change to qualified immunity, which shields police officers and other public employees from liability for what they do in office. It essentially said that if this new entity created by the state took away their badge, then they could be sued, but that's the end of it. Many people advocate for an end to qualified immunity, specifically as it relates to police officers. Are you among them?
I am among them. I think that there is much more that we need to do to make sure that we hold police accountable for misconduct, in particular misconduct that has a racial element to it. I think that there's an urgent need to bring more police accountability, and I think that qualified immunity goes in the other direction and that we should move away from it.
What do you do in response to those who say it would discourage good people from seeking those positions for fear that innocent mistakes end up being criminally liable mistakes, for lack of a better expression?
So first of all, I have the utmost respect for people in law enforcement. I think that public service is something that's going to draw a diverse and qualified pool into that field. We need to compensate our law enforcement very well. But there are other defenses that are available to anyone who's involved in an altercation, and those defenses are available if somebody has a defense. But I don't think there should be a special defense of qualified immunity. I think that has led to too many bad outcomes, and I think that we should eliminate it.
It's almost always good for a state to be number one in something, but not in this area. We're the only state, according to reporting in the Boston Globe over the years, where the judiciary, the governor's office, and the legislature all believe they're exempt from public records laws. Is that a good way for a state to operate? And if it is not, what do we do about it?
I don't think it is. I think that we need to open up our government. We need to make sure that the public has access to the records of the governor's office and to other senior levels of the administration. There always should be some exceptions for deliberative process and for attorney-client privilege. There's some circumstances where the government should have the opportunity to deliberate on matters, but we need much more transparency in our government. We need many more opportunities to hold our government accountable. That means amending our open meeting laws as well, and giving more access to data and to records to the public so that the public can trust what's happening in the government on our behalf.
Quentin Palfrey, it's good to see you. Good luck, and I hope to see you a lot in the year ahead.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here, Jim.
Mine as well. Thank you.